machine is the message. The message.
Hello and welcome to another episode, yet delayed, of The Machine is the Message. I'm one of your hosts, Patrick Keenan.
I am the other one of your hosts, Alan Smith. Welcome back. Excited to have you here. And there's a few keynotes to talk about today. I think this is going to be like the keynote episode, basically.
Yeah, it's been a lot of announcements, and it is the season to scramble to tell your developer story. And so we're just going to kind of talk through some notable things that we saw in the different keynotes. As a summary, there was a Google keynote that we haven't talked about yet. There was just an Apple keynote, or WWDC, their developer conference, that we haven't talked about. And there was also a Microsoft Copilot sort of announcement that we haven't talked about. So let's get to it.
And don't forget, let's do a post-mortem on a keynote that had us really excited and then turned out to be a little bit scammier than anyone expected. So it's easy to stand on stage and talk about how great something's going to be, and sometimes harder to deliver. So let's keep that in mind as we go through these.
Yeah. So, and a lot of these things are promises. I think the most notable thing about the Google keynote was this crazy DJ man. I don't know if you saw this.
I didn't see the DJ man.
Maybe it's not.
Who's the DJ man?
The DJ man was going nuts. Let me go. IO DJ. So this is the pre-show. So that's what it is. So all these conferences, you kind of want to get people hyped up. However, your audience is all kind of nerds like us. I'm not full screen that. And so what you get is opening acts. And this dude is rocking it. Let's just do that. Yeah. He's like the modern.
Charging around the stage. I love it.
It's just saying Google. So he generates.
Oh, that's Mark Robert.
Oh yeah,
or Riboulet. Sorry, Riboulet. Mark Riboulet. No, he's actually like a big name. He's got some like he's very big on YouTube at the moment as well. So no, that's good to see him there. That's his regular energy. That's not him going crazy for Google. That's like every show he does.
No, yeah, I appreciate the energy. I think we need a little bit more of that, like ridiculous energy. Kind of tend to take ourselves too seriously, and this guy was living it up, man. He was just like straight out of Silicon Valley and self-aware ridiculousness. So that for me, that was the highlight. But also, they announced a lot of AI products.
The demo that you shared at one point, there's a demo where they're walking around the Google office with some basically like smart glasses on and asking the smart glasses questions. And they went through like 8 different use cases that were so great. Like every single one of them was like an everyday, I could use that. That to me was the highlight. I was blown away by that piece.
Google Glasses demo. No, that's gonna trigger.
No, that's the old Google Glasses.
We'd rather
11 years ago today. Yeah.
Oh man. Speaking of which, I did have a pair of Google Glasses that still live in their case.
Does that make you a glass hole or
a recovering glass hole, I suppose. All right, so here it is. Can you hear the audio?
It's pretty rough. Can't really hear it. Why don't you just walk us through what they're doing?
So it's like looking at a whiteboard, asking what can I add here? So it's kind of analyzing the whiteboard. So it's kind of walking around. It's got vision. You can talk to it. It's going to tell you stuff about what it's seeing. Is the essence. I mean, we've seen a lot of this. and we've been talking about it on this podcast, but notable that Google is actually kind of playing catch up here because this is not publicly released. So, but their vision model is powering a lot of this. And I think a lot of the interesting bits were in the conversational nature, talking to AI, showing it stuff, and like being able to like read really quickly what you're looking at.
Yep. And also having
So I
some
don't know.
contextual memory of your space, right? Like that was a big thing there where, for example, they're like, do you remember where I left my coffee cup or whatever? And it's, the glass or
Yes.
the glasses had seen it in the room somewhere and were like, oh, it's over here. And for me, I was like, that's cool, right? Like that's
Yeah.
really interesting. There's something that gets to that ultimate recall, never forget a thing again, that we're talking about, where it's the always on observer with the perfect memory.
Yes. Yeah, and it was interesting. I don't have the link, unfortunately, but they basically used a robot dog to represent this notion that it could know where you were, but ultimately it's a 3D map of your space, like a live updated 3D map of your space that you can query against. Where did I leave my keys? Do I have enough milk? So being able to like capture and represent the real time world around you and use it in the same way you would upload an image to an AI, like you kind of like link your space to an AI, is pretty interesting. It becomes just another input to the prompt that you're trying to
It's
do.
amazing because it's kind of like having, another way of looking at it, to just sort of step back for people would be like, uh, think about when we first had in-home, as voice assistants like Alexa, right? And you could just it was kind of always there, and you could just ask a question or query, um, a request of like, could you play this music or could you do that? And it felt kind of useful. Like it was like, not bad, right? Like there's something cool about that it was just always there. But then to say,
Mm-hmm.
okay, well, we're going to give that thing a mega brain, and we're going to give that thing vision, and we're going to give it a memory of your space entirely. Like when you add those three things to that thing, it just multiplies, right? Like that's not like a 1 + 1 = 3. That's like a 3 cubed thing where it just starts to get bigger and bigger and bigger in terms of the possibilities of what can be provided as value to the user, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think there's what does it see? What does it remember? What are you asking for? What are you telling it? And then I think there's this other piece of latency. Did we talk about the GPT-O release? Omni release? I don't
No,
think
we
we
haven't even
did.
talked about that yet. No.
Oh my God. So like the other piece here is yet another keynote that we haven't talked about. Um,
This is 1 month in AI. So we've missed essentially 1 month just due to other stuff going on in our lives. And there were
yeah.
like 5 keynotes with essentially earth shattering level AI announcements. Like that's what happens in a month these days.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is the GPT-O release. And I think there's a point, I don't know if they get to it, but basically you can talk to it and interrupt it, and it responds immediately. They have an audio feature that exists today, but this one is just like to a point where you don't have to wait for it to answer. So this is all I'm saying here is like the latency matters a lot. It changes it from feeling like I'm sending you a prompt, you're sending me an answer, to like somebody's literally on the other end looking through my camera and helping me out with what I'm working on. So in this case, it's like you write a math problem and it can help you figure out what the answer is, or like, understand how to solve for X in an algebra equation. There's another one that's further on that's a screen share. I don't know if it's in this one, but you can share your screen on your computer and get it to analyze what you're looking at. You can move around your computer. So it's not actually just an image. It's kind of like sending this video feed up to the cloud. And so you can easily put this next to that Google one with the glasses or the other stuff that we'll look at and see that, oh, wow, the inputs are not going to be these static, like I'm forming a prompt for you. They're going to be an ongoing stream of context that I'm giving you. And I want immediate answers. Like the immediacy, I can't tell you how much this demo changes because instead of like, you know, 300 milliseconds, it's 30 milliseconds. Like the amount of latency when you get to these levels between like, you know, 30 seconds, 300 seconds to 3 seconds is like worlds of difference. It's between like, you know, feeling like you're talking to a computer and writing an email versus, yeah, somebody's beside you, like, and they're really smart and they're on the ball. So yeah, it's
Yeah.
the latency thing is big.
And we've known this in interface design for a long time that latency matters, right? And if you mouse over a button and it takes 50 milliseconds to change color, that feels way worse than if it's instantaneous, or if you move your mouse in a 3D environment and it feels like it takes a minute for your vision to shift from left to right. And we're very sensitive to that, right, as people. And even if you're talking to someone and there's latency like on a call like we even have now, right, it breaks down the relationship in a way where it's like you just don't feel as connected. Where when
Yeah.
you get that super low latency, you get that feeling of like we're on the same page, like we're in this together, like we start to merge into the same thing. And it's like that in a good conversation. And that's what we're getting to, is feeling like we're in a good conversation with somebody in the room, not you're sending a letter and getting a response a month later. That's a different type of communication. You know what I mean? This is
Yeah.
really, really instantaneous feedback from the mega brain that just it just feels different, right? Like there's no way to explain it other than this is a new level, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and if you've played with Midjourney, or now like Apple's got a thing, and obviously there's DALL-E with OpenAI, and Google's got their image generation. But you play with that by saying like, "Hey, do this," and no, now and add an umbrella, make it darker, and you're kind of like going through this loop where you're like revising it over and over again. And you compare that, like I think about that, and then I think about like audiobooks or even this podcast where you're like, listen to it on 2x speed, right? So
Mm-hmm.
instead of kind of like this slow, like iterative process, you're actually like going twice as fast as a normal human would talk. And so like I wonder, like, will the future be this kind of thing that responds to me much more intelligently and faster than a human would? Like, do I get to a point where my loop is actually much faster in the same way when I talk to somebody after listening to an audiobook, I'm like, whoa, are you talking in slow motion?
Yeah,
I
yeah,
don't know.
yeah.
Yeah. What it'll do to our
There's
brain.
there's something there too. I notice a second thing too, which is they're constantly interrupting the GPT, right? Because it'll go on,
Yeah.
like it doesn't
Yeah.
have, like, it's not watching your body language to tell if it got the idea right or not. So it'll just keep talking about the thing that you asked it about. And so they're just always jumping in and interrupting. And I wonder how much that's going to spill over to other human interactions. Like, are we just going to think it's okay to interrupt people all the time when they're not saying exactly what we want them to say? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
that feels like a potential unintended consequence of this, where when you are reading it in text, there's something different where you can kind of skim through, you can hit the stop button, you can read the text much faster than ChatGPT can give you the audio, but it is a different type of interaction, where when you're working in a chat format and you're reading what comes back and kind of like skimming it, stopping it, or like restarting, etc., there's a different, maybe it's about a different type of information that you're working on, or a different use case where it's more appropriate. And some of the use cases they talked about here, one example that I thought was cool was a guy was trying to come up with some different character voices for a show or something he was working on,
Oh yeah.
using, so this was an OpenAI one. I thought that was a
Yeah.
great use case, because you could never do that in, like, you could ask ChatGPT to describe it for you and say, hey, give me the characteristics of this character's voice. And then you'd have to read those and then make it up in your head and be like, okay, is that it? Yeah, that's kind of it. Whereas it could just say, rah, 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 and make like a goofy voice. And you'd be like, yeah, that's the goofy voice that I want. That sounds great, right?
Mm-hmm. I know. I saw it on
There it is. Character
Twitter.
voices with GPTO, second link down.
This one?
Now your screen. I must have been seeing a laggy screen, but it's
Oh,
called
I see.
Character Voices with GPT-O.
Yep.
GPT-4. Oh, there you
Yeah.
go. Yeah. Yeah, that one's great. I was really impressed with that. It was because it was a fun use case, right? It was like just something a little different where you don't expect it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
people can
He's like,
check
make
this
me a
link out.
cackly voice, like make it more shrieky. And yeah, oh yeah, they're so good. And then you have these two different voices that you're playing with, and you can make them talk to each other. So you're basically generating kind of like these distinguishable agents. And I do wonder in this new world, like maybe people are listening to us on audio and they can maybe distinguish us. But will we be kind of like, will that become the modern equivalent of UI design? Like, is basically kind of custom voices. Like, will I know what Apple sounds like versus what Google sounds like versus what, you know, I don't know,
Yeah,
7-Eleven
right.
sounds like?
A funny one I think of is, you know how a great prompt for, almost any AI is to say, imagine you are an expert in this topic
Hmm.
before asking for information or help on that topic. So imagine you're a go-to-market expert, or imagine you're a world-renowned physicist, as you're developing content on that. And that kind of narrows and deepens the uh, data that is focused on for your answer, which usually gives you a better answer than if you just ask it the question without asking it to imagine that it's this person who knows all of this stuff and thinks about things in this way. Well, imagine it was saying, okay, sure. And then it puts on a voice of, hey, I'm the expert in whatever, right? And kind of becomes the character for you.
Yeah. Yeah, or like, and yeah, what is the concept of that? Like, does it become the character, or does like, yeah, oh, okay, I'll get that person. Hey, ChatGPT, let me know you want some help. What's up? Um, yeah, like how do we do this in a way that's helpful to people? I also think about your interrupting piece. When do I do that with humans? Like, when do I interrupt them? And I know that it's like a little bit aggressive when people are calling me about duct cleaning. If somebody's calling me about cleaning my ducts, I'm like, excuse me, sorry, sorry, excuse me, remove me from your list, hang up. And so, like, I wonder if this emergence of, really low latency, believable AIs will just be like, I don't know who I'm talking to on the phone, and I just have to interrupt them. Like, for people who I'm not talking to in person or like that I don't know, will I just kind of assume they're AIs and like treat people like AIs? I don't know.
Yeah, and more frequently they will be. And so as far as you know AI is making phone calls, we're going to see a lot more of that, based on what I've seen so far in terms of the type of agents that were like specific agents that we're developing and seeing what's getting built. So I won't speak too specifically about it, but there's a lot of business to business use cases, and a lot of them involve cold calling, and a lot of them would be, if like, look at the math, right? Imagine you could have a salesperson like that rep for duct cleaning. He can do 100 calls a day. How many can AI do, right? There's
Yeah.
orders of magnitude more. And so to not try to build an AI to do that. And I think the interesting thing here is too is, when you build an outbound sales team, or you build a marketing function, the core thing is you figure out the playbook, and then you teach the playbook to somebody. And then if they can't run the playbook, there's only two things that could have happened there. One is you didn't teach them well enough, or they're not the right person. But if you were able to
Hmm.
get results for it, and it's not a skilled thing, which most of this stuff is not, like duct cleaning, like you don't need a master's degree to call people to see if they want their ducts called, right? So
Hmm.
or cleaned. So you get this huge swath of, hey, we can just give the instructions to an AI rather than a low skilled laborer, or essentially like quote unquote unskilled labor, because we can give the instructions and it can follow instructions well enough. And so now it's just about this race to take every vertical and every instruction set that's been documented and turn it into an AI. Like that's the phase that we're in right now in business. Of
Yeah.
it's going to be a couple years of just taking every low skilled labor and turn it into an agent.
Yeah. That's interesting. And so the things that we've looked at so far, Google and ChatGPT, they see that and they're like, well, we want to provide the bones of that LLM. Like, we want to be the tool that people use to turn all of these existing millions of business processes into more intelligent, queryable, agent-based experiences or platforms or products. That brings us to Apple, where they've chosen not to do that. Funny enough, so
Yeah.
this is yet another keynote. They released Apple Intelligence, which you can kind of see. I
Is
don't know.
that does that stand for is that AI, Apple Intelligence? I didn't know it was Apple Intelligence all along, but okay, I guess that's what AI stands for.
Yeah, what we've been talking about. We've just been waiting for this moment to see what it is, what AI actually is.
Finally,
Yeah.
finally.
So this is like Siri, but like kind of supercharged, and apparently better than it was before, because before it's like just for setting timers, and I didn't get much value out of it. Um, so yeah, they have this generative image piece to it. You know, that you have generative emojis, I guess, Genmojis. You
I,
can
I
do
I cannot
fuzzy.
believe they pushed on this Genmojis thing so much. Like, to me, this is like so like what are they trying to I don't understand the logic for them spending so much time talking about generative emojis and that being like a hook. Like, did they think that this was going to be the thing that like drew people in, as far as like, hey, you can generate images and here's a use case for that. There's not, you can't find an emoji that you want to express yourself through emojis, and now you can make one. um, I didn't get
Yeah.
this. I was just like, guys, this is transformative for one of your core feature sets, and you're talking about being able to make emojis like this. I didn't get it. I don't know if you understand this feature, but for me, I was like, I don't get it.
I think with the generative image, particularly, a lot of things can be bad, like quality wise, offensive wise, content wise. And so what they've done is they have like three styles of images you can generate, and they use Genmoji, which also has like a fixed set of things that are going to come out the other end. And so Apple being Apple, which is kind of like the Disney of software, they
Mm-hmm.
don't want to offend people. I think they want to, and they purposefully constrain the outputs, because I think they're just worried that they can't control what comes out the other end. And so you see that with the image piece. It's like, we're going to do it in these playgrounds, and like you're saying, we're not going to make it really revolutionize the system. And they also do it in queries. So what they've done is, like, as a developer, I put in hooks to my app and I say I can answer stuff about photos, or like I'm a notes app, and then I give it some fixed query domains, and then it can call my app sometimes. But there's like 100 things. There's like 100 things that Siri can do, and then the rest they just kind of throw over to ChatGPT, which they didn't really feature prominently. It's kind of like an escape hatch for anything that's general query intent, like, hey, how tall is Obama? Um, yeah, they're just going to say, do you want to ask ChatGPT? And it's like a handoff, and they don't want to touch it because the answer might be wrong or hallucinated. So they've really constrained AI on their device, and they are not really a development platform for the new business cases that you're talking about. They've specifically decided not to be. They are a platform for accessing app functionality via voice. That's their version of intelligence, which is like super constrained when you think about it. And
It is.
yeah, I don't know if they're gonna kind of win in this round.
It's like, I guess they're kind of solving that last mile problem. Like, this is like the part of you that's closest. This is, they are the iPhone, right? Like, the iPhone was the last mile problem. It's like, well, we hold the window to everything, therefore, we've got it. If they're saying, okay, well, we've got that voice connection, at the last minute, it's kind of like they're just improving the interface, right? Like, it feels incremental in a way, where we're just doing that thing we were doing before, but better, as opposed to adding something really completely new. And this
Mhm.
this was my secret hope with Siri. I've always wanted Siri to be way better than it is, and the only way to get value out of Siri in terms of being a great interface was to build shortcuts, and then you would have to build the shortcuts by hand, right? And then it would
Right.
be able to call on those shortcuts based on its limited capability. But you could call a shortcut, right? Like, you could say, hey, ask Perplexity how many ounces in a fluid ounce, right? Or something like that. They would figure it out for you. But it was a pain to get it up and running. So nobody does that. And now
Yeah.
that you could you could just do that, and you could ask Siri to go do stuff for you, like, open my food logger app and put in these two things. There's a good chance it's going to be able to succeed and actually do that. And that makes the amount of
Yeah.
time that you need to spend on your phone and reduces the friction. Like, me saying that versus me going in and doing that are like orders of magnitude different and more difficult. And so to me, that's a massive jump. That's a really, really good improvement. I've been waiting for that for sure. As far as the actually answering tough questions and generating content and ideas the way that ChatGPT does, it feels like a match made in heaven, right? Like, you're just like, okay, well, if they're not going to be able to create a GPT 4.0 level model, they could just use GPT 4.0, for as long as they need to. And sure, they're building up that part of the ecosystem. Are they building their own, at some point in time, and they're just going to swap it out, and it'll be like, when they made changes to their privacy policy and everyone got tanked because they were the last mile, they were the gatekeepers, right? They could
Yeah.
do that with ChatGPT. Like, there's no data in ChatGPT. Like, it doesn't. In a way, the switching cost from ChatGPT to Claude is like very low, right? Like, I can go
Yeah.
from one to the other with most of my daily work, and
Yeah.
it stands to reason that it would be the same moving forward, if Apple chose to go down that route.
Yeah, I think you're right. Like, basically, like, this is about personal context, but this is something that does it exist? Where else does it exist to this extent? Like, maybe it is in your profiles that you use for maybe your phone, your computer, but I don't know what other kind of hub would have this level of, like, knowing your calendar and everything. So, in terms of the use cases that they profiled, we've talked about the shortcuts, like making better use of shortcuts, kind of like having a more fuzzy way to specify. Like, I think the example they have here is set an alarm. Oh wait, no, set a timer for 10 minutes. So you can kind of, like, in the moment. It's just more. It's a better interface. It's a better voice interface is what they've added. And then the other example here is like, how do I schedule a text for later? And it tells you, open the app, write your message, tap this button. So to me, these are like two super incremental examples of how you could add AI to an existing phone ecosystem. And I can't help thinking about, like, the innovator's dilemma, and, like, are they disrupting themselves? Like, when they're teaching people how to use apps and press buttons in apps, and here they're like, yeah, we're gonna make it easy to, like, change what you just said about the clock app with the timer inside. Like, they're not pushing at the mental model, and I mean, why would they? They are the king of apps. But to me, it just feels like something's missing, and it's just like ripe for some other model to come up. But I do think what the walled garden is here is the personal information, right? And so, what other hub has this level of, like, your calendar, email, the news articles you've read, like the photos that you took, the places that you've been? Those things are hardware things. Like, the thing that brings those together is a piece of hardware. So, maybe the last decade or two has been about software and the scale of software and how important software is and the commoditization of these devices. But maybe we're in this new era where, like, actually the hardware needs to come together with the software, or maybe the hardware is actually the differentiator because it is collecting all this context that we talked about before.
It's that, like, who's in the room with you and who knows where you've been, and personal context. Imagine you had a little angel sitting on your shoulder, and it was just there to remember everything, and it saw everything that you saw. There's a physicality, to that. There is also a virtual version of that, which is just, something that was watching your desktop the whole time. Or, you gave access to recording your iPhone or iPad or, whatever tablet screen the whole time. So there is like a digital version that could have a ton of personal context without hardware, I think, if they have access to
Mm-hmm.
that last pixel layer. And we've seen that with stuff like Recall AI and Limitless and all of these products that are coming out to basically record everything that you're doing and provide some sort of detail and context back to that, like searching or whatever it is. And then there's a business to business version of that. Okay, well, now remember everything that every employee saw related to business. Somehow you draw a line, and now you've got a mega brain for the business, right? That has all of that organizational knowledge. And when someone leaves, you don't lose anything other than their individual cycles and opinion, which you may not even lose if the Westworld style, we can recreate that based on that was the best employee ever. Can we just make an agent of John or whoever's gone now, like you saw how he works, right? Can you just do what John did? Yeah, no problem.
Right. Interesting. Yeah, I think that brings us to why that won't happen on Apple. So, like when they demoed all this stuff, which in my mind it's not. Some of the stuff is really cool, but it largely incremental AI features. They also bundled that with strong privacy guarantees from the device to the cloud. So they've kind of built these Apple Silicon servers so that like you encrypt stuff in device and you can kind of send it up to the server. The server cannot see your personal context. It's actually able to like do some ranking and sort of like harder compute and then send it back to your device. So they have a whole vertical tech stack integrated, all designed around keeping your data private, which then gives you the permission or the confidence to allow Siri and Apple into more parts of your life and to know more about all the different things that are going on in these different apps. So in this world, your employer wouldn't be able to, because they wouldn't, in the same way they can't look at your WhatsApp, your encrypted messages, they wouldn't be able to get into that stuff. So there is now this kind of like, how much do you want to let a generalist AI know versus like how much do you want to think about, in the same way we think about end-to-end encrypted messages, and that's kind of a known thing. We need to amp up our understanding of privacy and like what context am I sharing with whom, when, etc.
Yeah, I think about the I wonder if they're going for the always on. Do you think they're taking Siri to like the always on level, or is it always going to be triggered? Hey Siri, what about this?
Yeah, I mean, if I was going to the world of always on, this is the first thing I would do, which is start with some incremental features and talk about privacy a whole lot. Like to their credit, they've been talking about this for like the past 10 years. They've really been nailing the privacy piece. So I think they saw this coming, like that. Yeah, they would want something that is more like always on compute going on. Yeah, that's how I would do it, and then release it as an opt-in that makes things more convenient. Like we saw that with Face ID and Touch ID. Like at that time, people were like, "Your fingerprint? What? This phone's gonna have your fingerprint? Gonna pretend to be me?" And then what they did is they actually just lengthened the password that you would have to put in. So like instead of like first they had no password, and they introduced the password 4 characters. Then it's the 6 character password. And they're like, hey, you know what? This could be a lot easier if you just use your Touch ID. And I think that's what's gonna happen here. Is like, oh yeah, Siri can do all these things for me, but I keep having to press this button. And then they're like, you don't have. We can do the auto press button. Do you want it to just like listen? And then you're like, oh yeah, that'd be convenient to me. So I think this is the stepping stone to that.
You can imagine a world too where there's everything becomes less kind of hardware-y and more like VPN, like where, hey, we see that it's you and now you just have access to your stuff anywhere, as opposed to you need a password for this computer. It's like, no, you need a password to get to your stuff, not for this computer. And every computer is everyone's computer, right? It's just like you just pick up a phone, like you pick up an e-scooter or whatever. And as soon as you open it, it sees your face or whatever it is, and then just gives you access to all of your data, which is essentially like 99.9% in the cloud at the moment anyway. Maybe they make less money on hardware at that point in time, but you can imagine that world coming to play as well. I just want to say one more thing about the Siri thing. Is it feels like they've actually, I want to say something positive. It feels like they've actually been able to deliver on the promise that Siri originally was, which was
Yeah.
a super helpful assistant, voice assistant to help you do things with your phone better than you could if you're just like typing stuff in. You need to be hands-free, but also faster than doing it yourself. Like, just somebody could help you access the features in your phone without touching it.
Yep.
If you asked somebody to use your phone for you, right? Like, it feels like we're almost there, which I'm really happy about. That feels good to me. I'm stoked about that.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that's true for probably people at Apple, because if you look at how they've designed this, so this is an example, which is uh, you send the email I drafted to April and Lily. It knows which email you're referencing, and Siri can take actions across apps, like make this photo pop. And so you're talking to the screen. You can even say, like, take this photo and email it to April, and write this thing. So it's able to like move across apps. It understands when you're looking at a photo, you say send it to somebody. So all these things, when Siri originally came out, you wouldn't be silly to expect it to already do that stuff. And your point is, like, now they've executed on their vision. I think the thing is that vision was crafted a while ago, and
Yeah, true.
so that's where they've bolted on ChatGPT for everything else. So now they have this kind of deeper integration with ChatGPT. It's like, help me make this into a poem, or like you can use all the kind of generalist LLM stuff with ChatGPT, but they have executed on Siri in a way that you can kind of think like, oh, they probably thought about how to do this. Because just from a frameworks level, I'm just going to do like a little Siri kit intense. So the way I did like some of the developer stuff, but the way they implemented this is they already have these things called intents. Um, and this is the shortcuts app that you were talking about. So an intent would be like add this photo to a photo album. And so you basically design for these app intents, like use this app to do that thing. And then Siri Kit, you put into your app, you say, I can answer these kinds of questions. And when I answer these things, do these things. So you kind of tie the Siri intents to your app. But to me, what's so ridiculous about this, I don't know if I have another visual, but what's so ridiculous about this is like, okay, I'm a developer. I want to give my customers AI. Okay, so now I'm going to open up my iPhone development app. I'm going to write in there what queries I can solve. Those queries will call an API on the internet. I'm going to bundle that functionality and give it to Apple. They're going to vet that app. They're going to then distribute that app. Then my customers have to download that app. And now that they have that app, they have a shell that when I ask something, it's going to go talk to the internet. And to me, the thing that's changed is like all apps today are a front end for the internet, and we're forcing people to go through this weird, archaic, like uploaded binary thing just to introduce, like, hey, I can show you what photo you're looking at. You don't need local binaries to do that. That's like a web query. So I think that's the thing that's got to click for me is like, and that's the thing where I'm like, I don't know what Apple's like with it, like to get people to put that into their binary. And then like I'm this developer, I'm like, I want to do that on the web, and they're like, good luck, we only work on like iOS devices. What? Why would I invest in that? And people will invest in that, but it just feels like an archaic vision that was executed finally. Not archaic, but it's an older vision that was executed really well, and then they said, and ChatGPT. They're like, and by the way, we added what you expect from AI.
And you got to feel for the developers and, Apple. It feels like, you speak to anyone from Europe and you talk about checks and they're like, what are checks? You guys have checks? It's like, yeah, it's a piece of paper and you write down how much money you want to give somebody and then you sign your name to it and it's kind of like as good as the money. And they're like, really? Like, how does that work? And it's like, well, then they take it to their bank and then it takes like 7 days and then they get the money. And people just start shaking their heads and be like, why do you still have that? It's like, well, it's like 1960s technology. It's like, well, the reason why we have that is because we spent all this money, the bank spent all this money on OCR and didn't want to drop it, right? Like, we built all this infrastructure and had this vision for how things were going to work and couldn't let go of it. And there is a better way to do it now. And we still have this old one. Everyone could use, Interact e-transfers. Everyone could just use straight up bank transfers like they implemented directly without Interact in Europe. But there was this sunk cost of infrastructure and this long-term mental model of how this stuff works. I'll give you one other example of even just in software, like how that underlying, like what you're talking about is that like one layer down from what people are trying to do and the thing on the other end, there's usually a bunch of stuff that exists. Like if you were in point A and you were trying to get point to point B, there's a scooter or a bicycle or a car in between the two, right? And so if we think about something like cybersecurity, right? Cybersecurity is big. In cybersecurity, there's all these apps and all these platforms designed for humans and, InfoSec, like security teams or SOC teams, like security operations center teams to use to get access to all of this data and see what's going on and to sort of like reach in and touch it and work on this problem. And now you've got AIs coming in, doing cyber attacks. And the only way to, kind of compete against that is to put AIs on the other side as well. And you know what? Neither AIs really need that software in between. And so that software starts to drop out and disappear. And it's just an example of where the old thinking of what was there changes in this new paradigm. And it's a very different example than the one we're talking about, but it's the same concept where a lot of the stuff that we've built is just kind of unnecessary moving forward. And so what do we need? We need something different. And that takes a lot of effort to convince people to drop the old and just begin with the new. It's very difficult.
Yeah.
And so I feel for Apple. I feel for all the developers. I feel for the strategic decisions they have to make and how hard that must be.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't know the usage of Siri or like what it is primarily used for, but if people are used to that, then extending that functionality makes sense. I guess the thing that would be harder to do, but feels like the necessary work of designing products is knowing when the vision doesn't actually fit the need. And we can talk about that a bit later. But yeah, there's some point where you're like, okay, like people aren't doing that, or like they're just using this for timers. And then you see like this other thing where like people are putting their whole life story into this ChatGPT thing. They're having like long conversations, and maybe there's just like a different mode that's helpful. But yeah, I see how Siri is meeting people where they are. It uses the shortcuts app. You basically develop these shortcuts. You can invoke them in more fuzzy ways. So it's all good. It's all good. And you don't have to get people to do a new thing. So that makes sense to me. I mean, it reminds me of the phone call piece, which is why are AI phone call things so attractive? Because everybody has a phone and they answer it, right? And like they know how to hang up. So there's like a built-in understanding of how to talk to somebody over the phone. And so maybe that's where Siri fits. Is like it's a thing you know how to do.
It kind of reminds me of, remember when the iPhone first came out and they had these like tent poles, like these three big things. Like, you know what the iPhone is? We know what the iPhone is. It's these three things.
Yeah.
It's a phone, it's music, it's like an iPod, and it's a breakthrough internet device. And it turns out that it's barely a phone and it's, barely an iPod, and it's like 99.9% breakthrough internet device, like other stuff, like apps, etc. And it just took a while to come around to that. Like, people need to use it for a while and see like, this is where it is. And it feels like we're kind of at that stage with AI where it's like, you know what AI is? Yeah, we know what AI is. It's this, but it's like, actually, we kind of don't. We're coming around to it. And I think that one of the really interesting dichotomies here is when you use ChatGPT, you use one of these, any LLM, and you see what it can do. It's like shocking. It's like, oh my God, I feel like there's someone on the other end of this thing. Like, this feels like a whole person. And then you use Siri, and it's like, why can't you just press a couple of buttons when you could write an entire book, right? It's like, this, all I'm asking you to do is press a couple buttons inside of my phone. And to me, that's where the cognitive dissonance is between, why does this thing suck so bad and this thing's so good? And it's because one is
Yeah.
completely self-contained, and then the other one has to spread across all of these different tools that were developed in silos. That was the whole point of apps, is like, each one is its own thing, and then you need to learn how to use each one of those, right?
Yeah. So I have to. We can close the Apple stuff after this, but I have to. On that note, I have to share this video, which is, to me, this is like a sleeper feature. And what you can do is you can use your phone from your computer. I don't know if I can get a slide of this, but basically your phone is on,
Yep.
and their use case is it's like on the other side of the room, and you want to access it from your computer. Maybe this isn't the right video. And so it's like screen sharing, but like remote screen sharing and dialing into your phone and using the apps. Now, in a world where your phone is the center of the constellation of all your personal information, what else could that be used for? Like, I think, to me, the notion that a computer can use your phone remotely without you being near your phone unlocks the ability to use all your personal information. Like, you can do that. You can tap into your phone wherever you are. You got a watch on, or you're wherever you are. That becomes kind of your personal server. And so I think, to me, that feature is like a little sleeper thing that they're getting the pipes ready. And that's where it can be a really interesting bit that moves you beyond just your phone and beyond just the Siri, to control the apps on your screen, because you don't need to see your screen anymore when you've got this kind of remote control thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I hadn't thought about it, because when I saw this, I was like, this feels really like a non-starter. But to think about where it could go and what it's conditioning people to is pretty interesting. Hey, why don't we do this?
Mm-hmm.
Why don't we just like close this episode, leave it there, because we're kind of like at an hour. But there's a whole bunch of other
Yeah.
stuff, here. Why don't we just start a whole new episode, and people can tune in for that one if they want. So coming up next would be more stuff, essentially. So looking back on today's episode, what would be the big takeaway for you here? Like, what did you learn from this discussion?
So we talked about a couple keynotes. We talked about the Google keynote. We talked about the Apple's keynote. We talked about the ChatGPT keynote. Those are kind of the three ones that we covered. The question is, in the gold rush, are you digging for gold, or are you selling shovels? They're each selling their own kinds of shovels. Apple's saying, here's an app shovel for you to use. Google's saying, here's like a web-based shovel for you to use for your web apps. And ChatGPT is saying, hey, here's like an LLM-based agent shovel for you to use. Where will the next killer app, use case, breakthrough thing be? What will it be? I'm not sure. But it is notable that a year ago, these things weren't in play, and the entire kind of stock market and venture world has shifted around AI, and these are the big players. And so it'll be interesting to see where the chips fall in the ecosystem. And for me, that's like a question of, where do developers go to build the next Google, to build the next Apple, to build the next ChatGPT? So it's interesting. How about
I think
you?
for me,
What's your takeaway?
it's seeing the steps we're making, like the big players are making, towards this, always on assistant who's able to just do everything. And the feeling of that and how that feels, we saw it in Google's keynote, where it's seeing what you're seeing, and you can just ask it questions with low latency and get answers to help you perform, a lot of everyday tasks better. We saw it in ChatGPT's voice, where it's got this incredible low latency and this sense of like, I'm just have somebody here with me, like helping me work through this. And then we're starting to see it with Apple, where it's the promise of Siri, somebody who can just use my phone for me and access the functionality of this massive app ecosystem without having to, be limited to the bandwidth of my two thumbs, where, Siri could really only do a few things half decently before, can potentially do a lot more now. And as they move more towards this, we're getting there, right? Like we're getting there real quick in terms of feeling like we've got somebody who's just there to help us use computers to get more done. That's what it feels like in every case. So yeah, how quickly we're getting to that feeling of a person that works with me to get stuff done every day. It's that I could just talk to, right? Like that's amazing. We're there. We woke up and won the lottery, man. We're living in the future. It's here.
Oh my God, am I actually talking to Alan? I don't know. All right, well,
Maybe.
Thank you for tuning in. Till next time, when we'll cover
everyone,
the controversy behind the keynotes.
She is the message, the message.